Good evening, everyone. My name is Corey McCray, Senator for the 45th Legislative District, representing East and Northeast Baltimore. I'm also the proud chair of the Baltimore City Senate delegation. I just wanted to thank you for joining us tonight for the Baltimore City Senate delegation's weekly virtual briefing. If I could just take the time out to recognize my colleagues who are with us this evening. Senator Hayes will be joining us. Currently, he's in executive noms and he's coming right over. Senator Carter will also be joining us. Senator Murray Washington, who will be tonight's moderator. Senator Charles Sidnor is here, and Senate President Bill Ferguson is in executive noms and will be joining us momentarily. We've had the opportunity to hear how COVID-19 pandemic has affected small businesses. Last week, we've heard about how it affected our colleges and universities by hearing from our respective presidents. But tonight we will hear how COVID-19 has impacted our housing security and homelessness in our city. More specifically, how it has affected homeowners, tenants, and landlords. We know that ending homelessness and increased housing securities are matters near and dear to our Senator Murray Washington's heart. Recognizing this, she will be tonight's moderating panel. Senator Washington, at this moment, I would like to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and thank you, colleagues. We know this issue of housing security, or housing insecurity, is actually near and dear to all of our hearts, and I thank the Chairman and colleagues for giving an opportunity to deep dive on this, not just for us, because we hear these things in our committee hearings. I'm the chair of the Joint Committee on Ending Homelessness, but to provide an opportunity for our constituents to also understand some of these topics. We have a really good panel of people from a range of perspectives to address this issue. I wanted to start off with this quote. I was thinking about what to say, and I found this quote by American journalist Michelle Norris. And it's in thinking about COVID and how in some ways things slowed down and changed. The great pause needs to become the great recalibration. We don't reach for normal, let's reach for better. That's why we're here today, to reach for better, not normal. Normal will not work, and when it comes to our current housing instability, our current eviction rates, our current foreclosure rates, and this crisis that so many of us are facing. The pandemic is shedding light on affordable housing crisis that existed well before the outbreak of COVID-19. And the oncoming flood of evictions and foreclosures will extend well into the future. The state has devoted a good number of millions of dollars in the CARES Act for housing assistance, but really what some of our constituents and some of the people that are going to talk with you today are going to say, without some type of large scale state effort that sets and creates a good approach that's coordinated, what the programs that we currently have are going to have limited impact. And we as a state and also as a city need to focus more directly. This meeting is going to focus on making sure and learning about rental and mortgage relief measures that are going to be needed. It's going to look at what federal job losses and federal benefits there might be out there. The meeting is also going to be looking at maybe there are some adaptive reuse or commercial spaces that we can use to impact our communities and to end homelessness and increase housing security. We know in Baltimore alone, 57% of renter-owner households are housing cost burdened. That means they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing. So some of them, and 33% of city renters spend more than 50% or more of their income. So as I said, we have a great panel. We have to discuss this issue. We have our Attorney General, Brian Frost. He will be followed by, thank you, he'll be followed by Nicole Battle with the Governance Ecumenical Development Corporation, Mr. Stuart Campbell from the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, Ms. Lauren Hughes from Habitat for Humanity, of Chesapeake, Mindy Lehmann from the Maryland Bankers Association, Sharice Liu from the Public Justice Center, and Mr. Aaron Greenfield from the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. Again, thank you all so much to have this important discussion with us. And let's start with our Honorable Brian Frost. who has served. He used to serve in the House of Delegates before becoming, and the Senate becoming the Attorney General. His focus is on keeping our communities safe, limiting environmental damage by polluters, protecting Maryland consumers from fraud and predatory practices. So thank you, Mr. Frost. And we need for you to unmute. Thanks for joining us.
That's a really good idea. Thank you very much, Senator Washington, and hello, and thanks to all of your colleagues who are on this call, and thanks to the folks who are listening in as well. We last year, about 14 or 15 months ago, our office realized that access to justice during the COVID-19 crisis was going to be challenged, that the folks who needed help from the courts, the folks who were forced into court, folks who needed help from our government were going to be under a great deal of stress. And the crisis revealed the fault lines that already exist in society. As you know, people of color, minorities, people with disabilities have been much more severely impacted by COVID-19 than has the rest of society. So we put together a task force called the Attorney General's COVID-19 Access to Justice Task Force to see how the state might best address all of the problems that have arisen from this pandemic as they relate to our system of justice. And I'm going to talk about just one aspect. The task force made its report about 2 or 3 weeks ago. There are 59 different recommendations for the governor, for the executive agencies, for the judiciary, and for the General Assembly. And I'm going to talk about one aspect, and that is the eviction crisis in Maryland. We expect that when the different limitations on evictions are lifted, there will be hundreds of thousands of families who are in danger of losing their homes. And we looked at the situation in Maryland, and what we found before the pandemic was that we have many, many more evictions than do our sister states, more eviction filings than do our sister states. In Maryland, most years there's somewhere in the range between 650 and 700,000 eviction filings. We only have 825,000 or so rental units in our entire state. So the rate of filings is about 80% of the units that exist in Maryland. And in cities like Baltimore, the rate of filings exceeds the number of units. In other words, there are 130,000 or so rental units in Baltimore. And on average, there are about 150,000 eviction filings. That's more than one per rental household. In Baltimore, it only results in about 6,500 actual evictions, but the filings are enormous. So I think the reason for this is that we have some of the lowest court fees in the country. It costs $15 for the landlord to file an action for eviction in Maryland. And there are only 2 states in the United States who have lower filing fees. One is Nebraska and the other is North Dakota. Everybody else charges a whole lot more. $15 doesn't cover what it costs our courts to handle the evictions, let alone the very expensive consequences of the evictions themselves. And it's a simple economic question. If you want more evictions, you keep the price low. If you want fewer, you raise the price. And if you look at our neighboring states, we have about 16 times more evictions per household than does Pennsylvania. Their filing rate is about 5.3%. Maryland, again, it's over 80%. Delaware, it's 16.9%. New Jersey, DC, Virginia range from 12.5% to 15.7%. So in other words, we have somewhere between 5 and 16 times the eviction rates that our neighboring states do. And there are two ways, I think, to address this. One is to raise the fee. And the average cost to file an eviction case in the United States is $122. So we've introduced legislation to raise the cost of filing an eviction to $120. It's a little less than the national average. It's a big jump. And we don't want that proposal to redound to the detriment of tenants. So the legislation that we've introduced would prohibit the landlords from passing on that $120 charge and I think what you'll see are two things, both good. You'll see a large drop in the number of eviction filings, and you'll see that the state will raise some additional revenue, likely to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. And in our legislation, we propose that money be directed to legal services, to the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. They have been, they were essentially out of money about 6 months ago. We found some funding for them from our office, and the governor contributed some as well. So they're running, but they're running on empty. And we believe that these additional fees could be used to help people get representation when they're under threat of eviction, when they're in other court proceedings that seriously threaten their lives and their futures. And I know there are a number of different proposals in the General Assembly as to whether or not to have a right to counsel in eviction proceedings. We think that's a good idea. But in any event, the legal services providers in our state only meet about 20% of the need. The money that we think we can raise from coming up to just a little less than average in our country would help get folks all over the state the legal services that they need as well. So we're hoping to prevent evictions. We're hoping to provide legal services. I thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you this evening.
And thank you also so much, Attorney General Brian Frosh. We're joined by our Senate President and the Senator from the 46th District, Bill Ferguson, a Senator from the 40th District, Senator Antonio Hayes, and Senator Jill Carter from the 41st District. Just to remind our audience, we asked all of our panelists to answer the question, in broad strokes, how has COVID-19 affected Baltimore's homeowners, landlords, and tenants? And what steps have been taken either by your organization or your agency to promote housing security and to address homelessness, or anything else you think would be important for our constituents to hear? Next, we'll hear from Ms. Nicole Battle. She is the Chief Executive Officer at GEDCO, Govern's Ecumenical Development Corporation. She originally started her career with GEDCO back in 2006 as the Director of Real Estate Development, and as CEO, Nicole oversees senior services, community services, homeless and supportive services, as well as other lines of business. Thank you so much for being here today, Ms. Battle.
Thank you so much, Senator, for having me, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. You probably cut off like a good minute of my presentation, so time. But thank you. We're a 30-year-old nonprofit as well, and we operate mostly within Northeast Baltimore, but all over Baltimore City. Since COVID, we really had to change our way of operating. We do provide services, and they're more in-person services. In March, we changed our whole operations to virtual, which for us, it was very scary and different. And we weren't sure quite how that was going to work, but we were really blessed. We were still able to meet mission, even though a majority of it has been virtually as opposed to in person. Since this summer, we have moved to more of a hybrid type schedule where we are able to provide direct services to people, as well as still continue our virtual programming. as you mentioned, we provide housing and supportive services to those who are formerly homeless, as well as older adults, and emergency services in the community. A lot of our emergency services have ramped up through our GetCo Cares program, which is located in the basement of St. Mary's right on York Road. Since COVID, we've provided $34,000 in financial assistance to approximately 333 people. Now, what's really interesting about CARES is we provide eviction prevention assistance, we provide utility assistance, as well as a food pantry. We have changed the amount of money that we're providing for eviction prevention from $200 to $500. And just like we heard earlier by Honorable Frosch, we see the number of evictions increasing and probably more people coming to us. I mean, since COVID and thanks to the moratorium on evictions, it was a slow trickle. Like in March through June, we didn't hardly see anyone. And we also wasn't providing that type of assistance. But since this fall, we have been seeing more and more people coming to us for eviction prevention assistance. We have also taken an opportunity or taken advantage of the opportunity through DHCD with the eviction prevention funding for developers or owners of low-income housing tax credit projects. Because a lot of the housing we provide is for older adults, we haven't seen as much of an issue with our older adults in paying rent as you may see in other multifamily properties, but we have seen some, and we were able to take advantage of that. Because a lot of our residents are on Section 8, they really couldn't participate in the eviction prevention programs through the city and the state. Because usually their income can be modified based on, or their rent is modified by how much money they're able to bring in. Let's see, we, through our eviction prevention program, we usually fund that through donations as well as grants and some funding through the city, which competitive CDBG grants. As well as the state. The state had funding that was available to nonprofits where we were able to use that to also further assist the people that we serve. We have not had any evictions as a result during COVID, and we don't see that happening anytime soon. We have been able to extend payment agreements for our residents, particularly our men and women who are formerly homeless. So if they're having problems, which we saw before COVID, paying their rent, we usually put them on a payment plan. We've been able to extend that so that we can continue to help those individuals stay housed and also so that they can still pay their rent. Because as a owner and a service provider, we're still an owner and we still have our operations we need to pay for each of our units, which is a challenge for us being a small nonprofit. Let's see. During COVID, we did see a reduction in the number of people, surprisingly, that we received from the coordinated access system through the Mayor's Office of Human Services, partly because a lot of people just weren't working in their offices. So it was a challenge getting the necessary information for the individuals so that they could secure housing through HABC. So we did see a slowdown in that. And I think the city made a decision to really kind of look to our hotels in order to house people, but there were lots of providers that actually had vacant units that they needed to occupy. But because of COVID, a lot of those city agencies couldn't operate to full capacity. So you have a lot of smaller nonprofits who provide these housing and services for people who are formerly homeless who have vacant units still. It's getting better, but it's a challenge as a landlord and service provider. What we've also noticed is stimulus is great, but for those who are dealing with their sobriety, it's been a challenge, especially given the fact that a lot of people are isolated. So what we've been doing through our supportive services programs is we still do virtual addictions counseling, but we've had to return to in-person just to engage people even more and provide that more direct support so that people realize that they're not by themselves, that, that stimulus money does not need to burn a hole in your pocket. You can still achieve your goals. You still need to stay focused. And then, with COVID, everyone's dealing with, or a lot of people are dealing with, the mental health issues, the isolation, suicide, and addiction. Let's see. Those are kind of the things that we've been dealing with, or what we've been addressing. Our purpose is really to make sure that people still stay housed, that there are supportive services available. We've modified, and we will continue to modify operations to make sure that we do reduce the instances of homelessness in our city, within our properties. We have been able to provide a lot of food through donations, also with our partnership with the food bank, which really, I think, helps a lot of our residents, as well as community residents, not have to spend money on food, so that they can spend money on other things that are really helpful to them as they continue to live and take care of their families during COVID.
Thank you so much, Ms. Battle. And I'm sure the senators will have some questions afterward. Next is Stuart Campbell. Mr. Campbell is currently serving as our Director of Community Programs at the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. And in this role, he provides the leadership to communities seeking to provide support for residences, targeted populations, at-risk homelessness, homeless services, shelters, and related organizations. Mr. Campbell has been engaged with me from day one on our Joint Committee on Ending Homelessness, and again, has been a really good partner, I would say, in this respect. Mr. Campbell, please join us if you would.
Great, thank you, Senator, and thank you, Chairman McCray, and the honorable members of your delegation. Thanks for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here tonight. A lot has been going on at DHCD related to responding to COVID, especially around housing security and homelessness. I'm probably not going to be able to touch on everything during my remarks, but I'm happy to answer questions afterwards to fill in any blanks. My team administers about $24 million in a normal year in federal and state grants to the 12 continuums of care in Maryland and 17 community action agencies. In FY20, we awarded about $9.5 million to the COCs and another $9 million to the community action agencies. These are homelessness and poverty grants that support the work that they're doing on the local level. In addition to that, we have had quite a bit of CARES funds that we have been responsible for. Within the department itself, about $20 million in the coronavirus relief funds passed through the department for rental assistance through a variety of different programs. We've had $26 million in CDBG funds that were distributed in 3 different rounds towards rental assistance. And on the level of the programs that I administer, we provided the City of Baltimore, which is both the continuum of care and the community action agency. So the city itself is one of the public community action agencies and COCs. In fiscal year 21, we awarded $2.1 million in homelessness solutions program funds, which supported 8 different agencies in the city. We also provided about $3 million in CSBG funds in our normal year. But in CARES funds, we provided an additional $3.3 million in CSBG. So as you can see, there's a lot of funds that are going through our department, and we don't provide direct service as an agency. We support the different agencies and providers on the local level that have been working for years to address homelessness, both statewide and in the city itself. So the biggest news, though, is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, the ERAP funds. Maryland is slated to receive just over $400 million in federal ERAP funds. 143 million of that was already allocated to the 8 largest jurisdictions. Obviously, Baltimore City, Baltimore County are among those 8. The department will receive 258 million for distribution across the whole state. So we are already working in partnership to connect with the 8 jurisdictions to see how we can develop partnerships with them and work with them so that we can potentially support the work that they're doing. I believe Baltimore received a direct allocation of just over 17 million. Baltimore City, Baltimore County received 24 million directly. The allowable expenditures include arrears and forward rental assistance, as well as arrears and forward utility assistance. So those that are fragilely housed, both previously to make up the arrearages that they owe, as well as some forward months that they may need assistance with as they struggle to find a job or are otherwise impacted by COVID. It's also eligible to provide case management, which is really great because that's not often what's an allowable activity, an allowable expense. So we're excited to see that, and we're excited to see how we can help support implementation of that across the state. We're currently discussing the best and quickest way to distribute these funds. We have not made any decisions. As I mentioned, we are working and talking with the 8 jurisdictions, but we're also going to be talking with local providers to get a sense from them on the best way that we can distribute these funds. And the governor just a couple days ago announced the creation of a advisory panel of legislators that has not been pulled together yet, but we are looking forward to working with them as well. So that's a very quick summary. I'm sure there are lots of questions, but I want to keep it within my 5 minutes. So I will stop there and then be happy to answer questions later.
And again, thank you so much. And again, this is an opportunity to provide our constituents, again, with a broader understanding, both local in Baltimore City, but also statewide about what's happening. So thank you for that. Next is Ms. Lauren Hughes. She's been with the Habitat for Humanity for 9 years, and she serves as the Director of Homeowner Services. She holds a master's in public administration, and she sits on the board of the Consumer Credit Counseling Services. And her department oversees programming, financial education, sweat equity, and the home buying process for Habitat for Humanity. Thank you for being with us this evening, Ms. Hughes.
Thank you so much, Senator, and to this whole delegation. For those of you who are newer to Habitat, we are an income-based affordable housing provider focused on applicants earning 30 to 80% of the area median income and who are deciding to purchase their first home. So we have 2 groups of people where our focus has really lied since the onset of COVID-19. Our existing homeowners, which we have about 770 in Baltimore and the surrounding counties, and our prospective applicants that we're looking to match to homes within the Baltimore region. So on the existing homeowner front, we're looking at things much like a mortgage lender might with a bit of heart. So when COVID first hit, we kind of went back to basics and we just tried to reach out as staff to as many of our homeowners as possible to see how they were doing, how they were being impacted. And from a procedural standpoint, if somebody's income had been adversely affected by the pandemic, we would defer their mortgage payment for a period of time with the ability to extend that deferral as the pandemic went on. The idea is at the end of all of that, we would extend the maturity date on their loan and keep them from being in arrears for the long term. Fortunately, many of our homeowners have been able to maintain their normal payments despite COVID. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about why that is. And we do think that some of the preparedness is in respect to the financial literacy training that our program participants take prior to becoming a homeowner. But actually, there really is a connection between their ability to sustain the mortgage in a crisis because it was affordably priced at day one. So a foundational principle of our program is that we ensure that the initial mortgage payment for our homeowners does not exceed 30% of their gross income, and they're charged 0% interest. So the product itself is already affordable, which does help folks adapt in a situation like this. So now we're turning our focus to continue promotion of the income-based homeowners property tax credit to help ease the property tax burden so many of our families face. Starting with proactive outreach to make sure they're aware of the deadlines, that they can also have assistance with our staff members, helping them to fill out the application. So some of the tools we've used in that outreach is mailing letters to all of our homeowners. We sent postcards with important deadline information. We created priority outreach lists in terms of the homeowners that we know to be in the greatest need of receiving that credit. And we continue to promote it via social media to our larger network. And it's our ultimate goal to keep our homeowners in their homes and to work with them as much as we possibly can as they experience financial challenges. The second group is right now our prospective buyers. So these are all first-time buyers, and many of our policies and procedures so far for qualifying for our program have remained the same, but we're beginning to see some common trends that are pretty significant, particularly concerning their ability to meet more traditional mortgage standards. So some of those trends and challenges we're facing include gaps in employment or periods of receiving unemployment or temporary income, which obviously makes it difficult for prospective buyers to qualify. And we're seeing that more or less due to the job loss or the back and forth surrounding COVID-19. Also, mortgage lenders typically want to see consistent and timely rental histories, and with so many struggling to keep up with their rent burden during the pandemic, it's likely to have a significant ability on their ability to purchase a house, particularly in our target population, again, that 30 to 80% AMI. And we've also seen a greater reliance and greater utilization of credit for folks to make their ends meet. And that kind of leads me to kind of the last major barrier we see, which is the debt to income ratio threshold, which continues to be a primary barrier of families in this income range to qualify to purchase a home. And that was the case pre-COVID. So during COVID and post-COVID, we're just seeing that kind of exacerbated a bit. However, I'm happy to say we've been blessed to remain fully operational and building during this past year, and as committed to our ability to provide affordable housing as ever. We're listening to our homeowners, and we're listening and learning from our applicants about their stories and what they are experiencing, as well as industry professionals. So we can continue to think of creative solutions to meeting their needs in this time where things are anything but ordinary. And really, it's always our goal to provide homeownership that's ultimately sustainable in the long term for our families. So I thank you again for having me today and being a part of such a great panel. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Hughes. Next, we're going to hear from Ms. Mindy Lehmann. She currently serves as the Senior Vice President of Government Relations for the Maryland Bankers Association. At the top of this panel, we know that this crisis is both the solution towards our crisis, our housing crisis, is always about how the ways in which public, private, and our for-profit entities work together to address this. In this role, she develops and executes the industry's legislative and regulatory priorities. The MBA represents the FDIC-insured banks across the state of Maryland. And the Maryland banking industry provides an array of services, including residential mortgage lending. And then I wanted to make sure I brought Ms. Lehmann in, is that during a hearing, we learned about, there's a lot of things that I think a lot of homeowners don't know that is available for them. And I thought this would be a great platform for you to provide some of that, as well as the specific COVID-related questions that we provided with you. So thank you so much, Ms. Lehmann.
Well, thank you, Senator Washington and members of the delegation. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about this important topic. And with me today is Mr. Bob Enton. He's MBA's general counsel. And what we'll cover for you today is the role of the Maryland banking industry with housing and COVID. We'll talk about the mortgage relief options that are out there, both at the federal and the state level, as well as the foreclosure protections, again, at the federal and state level. So I'm going to ask Mr. Enton to cover the foreclosure piece. I'll talk about the response of the banking industry as well as the mortgage relief options. So I provided delegation staff with a PowerPoint slide deck, and I really encourage you to take a look at that. So our time is short, so there's a lot of information in there about the foreclosure relief options and the mortgage payment relief options. So I want to make sure you have that. There's also information links that are really good. They're customer-facing information links. So you might find this helpful if you get questions from constituents or want to share that with your constituents. They're good sources of information on a variety of things. So I'll begin with saying the success of a bank is inherently linked to its clients and its community. And as soon as the COVID pandemic hit, Maryland banks immediately jumped into action. They were very proactive, as well as the association. We immediately reached out to our media outlets to carry forward the message. If you have any concerns, as a first step, reach out to your banker. If you're worried about making your mortgage payment, a credit card bill, a car payment, car loan payment, student debt, reach out to your banker. We established a COVID-19 information site on our website that has direct links to all of our member banks. All of our member banks have information for payment relief, ways to get help, talk to your banker. So, please encourage your constituents to avail themselves of that information. In terms of the mortgage relief, diving into that a little bit, at the federal level, as a part of the COVID-19, the CARES package that passed, or let me back up a minute. Before the CARES package passed, Maryland banks were regularly providing an array of relief options to their customers. There's the skip a payment option, there's the longer term payment deferrals or forbearance, as we call it. There's reduced interest rate options. There's refinances and loan modifications that are going on at a very regular basis and consultation. Now, when Congress passed the CARES Act, a piece of that is sort of standardized forbearance for mortgage holders. Now, these are federally backed mortgages. So that represents about 75% of the market. It's mortgages that are held by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, for example. So what this provides is if a borrower, a homeowner, is experiencing financial difficulties as it relates to COVID, they simply need to contact their servicer, their lender, and request that forbearance. They are granted 180 days of mortgage payment relief, and then that can be renewed for another 180 days for a total of 360 days. So that's some very significant relief. Now, at the state level, Governor Hogan, through an executive order, is applying that same type of CARES-like forbearance to the non-government backed loans. For example, loans that a bank would holds on their own portfolio. So now that, in addition to the other mortgage relief options that were already available to those borrowers, they also have the option of the federal CARES-like forbearance. So that's sort of a snapshot of the mortgage relief as it exists at the federal and state level. And Mr. Enton, can I ask you to cover the foreclosure protections? Oh, you're muted, Bob.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having us present tonight. I think we have a good story to tell. The Bankers Association and the Maryland banking industry has been all over this from the outset. As Mindy stated, we have reached out. We have a website. We've talked to everybody that we can talk to say that if you're having a problem paying your mortgage, please let us know. So the fact of the matter is that in the state of Maryland, the governor issued an order on April the 3rd saying that the Department of the Commissioner of Financial Regulation could no longer accept what are called notices of intent to foreclose. And you must send a notice of intent to foreclose to the department 45 days prior to the filing of a mortgage foreclosure. Otherwise, you can't file it. So basically, I guess if you take, there have not been any, not a single mortgage foreclosure proceeding, new proceeding filed in the state of Maryland since the middle of May, not one. And those orders are still in effect today. We have worked very closely with the governor's office, with the Commissioner of Financial Regulation, with to address this issue. But the bottom line is that we've not heard a single complaint, not one, from a legislator who's come to us and said, I have a constituent that's come to me about their mortgage foreclosure. And the reason is there aren't any. And that's going to continue. We don't know until how long. The governor's order, which apply all the federal rules to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac mortgages, that is in effect right now. And we don't know when it'll end, whenever I guess the governor decides that it's no longer needed and we've gotten out of this mess. The other point I'd like to stress is that in Maryland, based on the foreclosure legislation that has passed since, I guess, about 2007, it takes on average over 500 days, 500 days, I think it's 545, to get through a mortgage foreclosure in the state of Maryland. So even if the spigot did open back up, you're still talking about almost, a year and a half before any foreclosures would occur. The final point I would make is that the last thing, the absolute last thing that any lender wants to do is foreclose. There is no advantage to the lender whatsoever. We haven't seen a surplus in a foreclosure sale, I would say probably in the last 14 years. So lenders bend over backwards to accommodate their borrowers. We have a very robust foreclosure statute that provides for pre-file mediation, post-file mediation, which is all conducted by the administrative office of the courts. And it's just, I knock on wood that foreclosures in Maryland have not become an issue, and we don't anticipate them becoming an issue. And I would just say, repeat what Ms. Lehmann said, the most important thing that you can tell to your constituents and anyone else that's having a problem with a foreclosure is to reach out to their lender. And I would say to each of you, if you have a problem with a constituent, please reach out to the Maryland Bankers Association and we will jump on it immediately. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Ms. Cherise Liu from the Public Justice Center. She serves as the attorney there. She's got prior experience and advocate for homelessness and survivors of domestic violence, as well as the Office of the Attorney General for redlining for the Red Line and Purple Line projects. Thank you, Ms. Liu, for being with us.
Thank you, Senator, and thanks the delegation and the chairman for having me and having this opportunity. As you said, I'm Cherise Liu, an attorney with the Public Justice Center, and I work for the Human Right to Housing team. And on a normal basis, before pre-COVID, we represented tenants here in Baltimore City, but we also fought for systemic change, legislation, and worked with coalition of renters and legal service providers to change some of the fundamental rental laws and practices here in Maryland. Then COVID hit, and I'm just gonna, I'm gonna scope out the problem a bit and tell you what I've seen, what we've seen, and what we're experiencing. So the minute COVID hit, it did not take any time at all. I mean, by March 16th, 17th, we were receiving a tremendous amount of calls from all over Maryland of terrified tenants that knew one paycheck, even an hour indifference in their paycheck meant they were close to an eviction. So it's estimated right now that over 200,000 households are at risk of eviction right now. We have always had a high rate of evictions in Maryland, and in particular, Baltimore City. From July through November, 115,000 complaints have been filed during COVID months, and over 2,500 legal evictions have happened throughout the state. We get plenty of phone calls daily of people who were illegally evicted or on the verge still of eviction, and we are still going to court fighting evictions. We have seen a tremendous uptick in breach of leases and tenant holding over because of the current COVID protections on the failure to pay rent. In Baltimore City itself, Baltimore has always had an eviction crisis, or at least within the last 30 years. And we've seen in 2019, we were able to get numbers then, and there were 144,000 eviction filings, but there is only 125,000 renter households. So more eviction filings than renter households. Who does it fall heaviest on? It falls heaviest on Black renters and female-headed households. Right now, during COVID, it's projected 36% of Black renter households are behind on rent, and 30% of household which earn less than $50,000 a year are behind on rent, to the tune of about $380 million, excuse me. They have recently put out a report. The Journal of Urban Health reported that, quote, lifting the stay on evictions has translated to over 433,000 excess cases filed in evictions and over 10,000, almost 11,000 excess deaths between the months of March to September. So we know how important it is for us to discuss this issue and to try to come up with solutions, because we are finally seeing, as many of us already knew, as many legislatures known and have been fighting and advocates, that housing and health go hand in hand. No one's health improves by being homeless, and it only goes down or worsens if you are homeless. So this time this is an opportunity for fundamental change. I will say that, and I will say that I do believe that legislatures and legal service providers are all looking for paths, and the community are all looking for paths to something better, right? As the senator mentioned, we can do more than the status quo. And Baltimore City looked forward and they passed the right to counsel. The council, who was the council president at the time and who's our mayor now, led the way for right to counsel. They found that it's cheaper, it's cost effective, as our attorney general just mentioned, and with an investment of $6.8 million, they will save the state $18.1 million and save over 30,000 families, 6,000 households per year, and over 17,000 individuals. That was pre-COVID numbers, right? And so
Ms.
now,
Hill, I'm so sorry. Could you wrap up? And we're just a little tad behind. If you could.
That's okay.
I just want to make sure, Mr.
Yes, that would be fast. Now, thank you. Now we are supporting the housing justice package from our state legislators, in particular, House Bill 52 and Senate Bill 454. And these bills are intended to create an eviction diversion and defense legislation. So right to counsel in eviction matters in the state, and to provide a smoother transition and access to rental assistance for landlord and tenants, and mediation or dispute resolution, a path for dispute resolution and payment plans for tenants, rather than what we have now, which is a very fast and direct route to evictions. And so that's what we've been working on in the past few months, and that's what we're looking forward to. We're also looking forward to the rental assistance that's coming down, but we would like for it to reach renter households and landlords before judgments.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much. This is right on target. And finally, Mr. Greenfield from the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. So, Mr. Greenfield.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senators. I really appreciate the invitation, and I will try and be brief, although there's a lot to cover here. So
Take your 5 minutes. We'll follow up with
do
questions.
the best I can. So as Senator Washington said, I'm with the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. We represent owners and managers of about 200,000, over 210,000 units and about 958 communities statewide. We support the industry itself, about 292,700 jobs, and have about a $64.8 billion impact on the state economy. It's important to note that we're an industry comprised of both large and small landlords, multifamily providers, small mom and pop, diversity in our asset class. Class A, Class B, and Class C, and I'll point out why that's important shortly. Prior to COVID, we had in Maryland a very strong rental market. Since COVID, our association has been doing twice monthly surveys of our members to determine what impact the pandemic is having on the industry. And not surprisingly, the industry is not immune from this pandemic. We have seen residents who have not been paying at a higher delinquency rate than before the pandemic. So we're seeing across all asset classes about a 17% delinquency rate. Class C properties, the naturally occurring affordable housing properties, have without question been hit the hardest. They're the ones that we're seeing delinquency rates averaging 33%. And I think we can all agree that rental assistance and a greater focus needs to be put on those Class C properties and those residents for more support. As has already been mentioned, we know that the courts are currently in phase 2 until March 14th and are not hearing failure to pay rent cases. They just are not being heard. There perhaps have been breach of lease cases, tenant holding over cases. This remark about it being spiked, if you look at the increase in numbers, proportionately, it is a large increase, but as a whole, failure to pay rent cases are 98% of all cases. And there's one simple question: did the resident pay the rent? We also know that there is in place the CDC eviction moratorium, and of course, the governor's affirmative defense in his executive order is still in effect. Like the bankers, it's really, really important that both sides are communicating. We implore residents to communicate and tell us about what challenges they're facing, whether we can put together a payment plan. We discuss voluntarily waiving late fees. We also share government and nonprofit resources with residents applying for eviction assistance programs. Our organization has been very involved in Baltimore County's very successful program with United Way, as well as other jurisdictions, and are looking forward to the $402 million disbursement. If I could just briefly respond to a couple comments that were made by the Attorney General. You know, the filing fee increase, it's true that in Maryland, there's a $15 failure to pay rent but what the Attorney General failed to mention in his $120 national average, which we're not sure where he gets that number, there is also a warrant of restitution which must be filed, which is an additional $65. So his equation of 15 and 120, frankly, isn't particularly accurate in my book. Similarly, when we talk about these 660,000 filings and a smaller segment of them being evicted, it's really important to mention this concept of right to redemption. Throughout the state, with the exception of Baltimore City, anyone within a 1-year period can redeem their tenancy before the moment of eviction. That's 3 times, and in Baltimore, 4 times over the course of 1 year. So we see a lot of frequent flyers, as we call them, folks who continuously are delinquent, and that's one of the reasons you have that really high increase in filing fee, in the files rather, filing of failure to pay rent, and then they ultimately pay at the moment of eviction. So we're happy to talk about changing that in law if anyone wants to entertain it, but that right to redemption is one of the main reasons we see so many filings. And then you know, this argument that an increase in filing fees will result in fewer evictions, we don't necessarily agree that that's the case. And we certainly don't know that it'll be a deterrent, but let's assume that it is a deterrent. Let's assume that you do increase filing fees $50, $60, $80, which we would have a problem with, of course. What you're ultimately doing is, let's assume you defer and you wait the second or the third month to file a failure to pay rent. At that point, the right of redemption is really challenging for that resident, because at that point, they're 2 or 3 months behind versus just 1 month behind at that initial filing. So I just want to make that point. It's really important that we understand the right to redemption and what that means within the process. And thank you again for this opportunity, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Mr. Chairman, we had so much content. We don't have much time for questions, but I just wanted to, again, thank all of our panelists and saying that, as you can see, this issue is very broad, complex. We'll probably do maybe we'll do a special session again on housing, but thank you for this opportunity. Thank Brian Frosch, our Attorney General, for staying on the entire time. Thank all of our panelists. So thank you so much, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Washington, and thank you, colleagues. Just want to give a big shout out to each and every person that served as a panelist for tonight, for joining us and providing insight into the status of housing security in Baltimore and housing assistance that is needed. I just want to thank Senator Washington one more time for moderating tonight's panel and for helping us to coordinate tonight's grassroots briefing. If this hour wasn't long enough for you, please feel free to continue the conversation by connecting with us via social media. The Baltimore City Senate delegation is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You may also visit us on the web at bcsdelegation.com. We will be holding grassroots briefings every Monday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. during the legislative session. We hope that you'll join us next week for our conversations with our members of the congressional delegation. Again, thank you and have a blessed evening. Thank you again.
Thank you.